12. So as I explained to you earlier in the week, Thursday and Friday are pre-recorded or independent work, and so this video spans really the tasks across 2 lessons, Thursdays and Fridays. But if on Friday you could make sure you are available live on Teams during when your lesson would be, because I'll be dialing in and ringing individuals to have the review and reflect conversation. Okay, so I've tried to make it really clear what the expectations are by the end of Friday, and obviously then I'll talk you through the explanation that sits alongside that. So we'll be beginning in a minute with retrieval. So obviously that's one of the things that you would have achieved. You'd have done your retrieval, it's on some key names, and that would just be for your file. I don't need to see evidence of that at this stage, but it's good practice for you to keep it in your file. There's going to be a bit later in this explanation an opportunity for you to create some flashcards, because I'm introducing you to some new research methods vocabulary, and that would once again be for you to make sure you've done them and to keep them and to use them for your retrieval practice. I don't want anybody just putting them away looking lovely in a plastic wallet somewhere and not using them. The whole point is you keep testing yourself on them. We're going to be looking at evaluating Ainsworth's strange situation, so building on what you were doing last week, building on some evaluative points, and we're going to be aiming to have at least 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses of that particular study. So that will be just presented in a table-like way, bullet points, and again that's just for your file. I don't need to see that, because where I'm going to see the evidence of that is in the final task on there, and that I am going to see and mark, and that's a 16-mark essay that we're working towards and building up to. So by the end of Friday you will have done this, you will have written the essay fully. And the question we're working towards then is outline and evaluate one study into attachment types. So it's not specifying Ainsworth, but we're using Ainsworth's strange situation, and you would do, because it's the most obvious one. And you're going to be doing that directly into OneNote. And when you go into your class notebook, in the assessments folder, you'll see I've created you a new page and the questions in there. Okay. So I want you to pause this and I want you to have a go at your retrieval. Once again, if you haven't got a printer, don't worry about presenting it as a table. It'll take you ages drawing it all out. Just literally 3 separate columns. So we've got the who, what they did, and what topic it links to. And I want you to be as precise as you can. So yeah, great, tell me it's the approaches topic or the attachment topic, but then think about those checklists that we have. What subtopic would it be? So be as precise as you can. So pause and have a go. So I wonder how you got on. Let's have a little look then. And you would obviously green pen and correct yours and identify any gaps. So when we're talking about Pavlov, we know that's classical conditioning, that's learning by association, his experiment with dogs. So that was from the approaches topic, but then I've jumped around a lot. So then we've gone to interactional synchronicity with Meltzoff and Moore. And then we've gone back to approaches with Freud and this idea of the his theory, his approach, where he identified the impact that that unconscious mind had. And then we look at Wundt, who of course opened the first psychology lab and used the technique of introspection. Garcia, the classical conditioning with the coyotes. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the humanistic approach. Bandura's Bobo doll experiment, so social learning theory. Schafer and Emerson, then we're jumping back to attachment and we're thinking about those stages of attachment. Remember, not to be confused with types of attachment. Skinner operant conditioning, and that was his experiment with rats. Ainsworth's strange situation, so in the attachment topic, and Lorenz, again, attachment and the idea of imprinting, the evolutionary theory. Now, I wanted to mix them up because that's good for your knowledge retrieval, but also so you can see it side by side and you can see how that actually the ideas of Pavlov and Skinner and Garcia come through then when we're looking at the learning theory of why attachments form. And the ideas of Lorenz come through when we think about Ainsworth, as we're going to be moving on to look at how those two link. So it all feeds in together. Okay, So in the classroom, I do this as a whiteboard task, and unfortunately, because it's pre-recorded, I can't really do that, but we're still going to go through the process because I think it's really important that before we go any further with evaluating Ainsworth's strange situation, we've absolutely got it clear, the details of that study. And remember, it was an observational study. It was done in controlled conditions where mum and infant were being observed, they were being filmed, and we were looking for the behaviour of the infant at different intervals. And we talk about those stages, if you like, or intervals in the study. So we have the exploration stage, when they both enter into the room and the child's got an opportunity to go off and explore and look at things and pick up the toys. It's a safe environment, of course, but it's strange because it's unfamiliar. They've not been in it before. So that's our first phase, and we're observing the behaviour of the infant all the time. And then we have the stranger coming in. So when mum's still there, remember, but a stranger comes into the room. So then we observe the infant's behaviour around the stranger. Do they seem particularly anxious? Do they not seem bothered? How do they react? So we have our stranger stage. We then have our separation stage, remember, where mum leaves. Again, we're observing very closely the infant's behaviour. And we have the reunion stage where mum comes back in. We do then have a slight repeat because then we have the stage where both stranger and mum leave and then mum comes back in. Now, I obviously haven't listed that as all 6 separate ones, but it's important you're aware of that. But each of those was highly controlled. They were 3-minute intervals. So Ainsworth and the researchers were very much in control. So we're going to be thinking today about what method this used, some of the details of that, and that's going to help us to evaluate. But let's check that we're okay with this. So I'm going to name you, and it will appear on the screen, a description of the infant, whether it's a type A, B or C, and then you're going to identify, just jot down on your piece of paper, what stage I'm describing. Okay, so these are all factually true. There's no tricks in there. I'm referring to type A as our insecure avoidant, type B as our secure, and type C as our insecure resistant. Now, if you're not yet confident with that language and those 3 types that Ainsworth identified, pause this, stop what you're doing, go back, revisit, check again. Do you know your A, B and C of attachment types? Because there's no point ploughing on if you don't. Okay, but once you're good with that, have a go. So first one, a type C child wouldn't be willing to leave the mother's side to investigate the new surroundings. So our options are, is that the exploration stage, is it stranger stage, is it separation stage, or is it reunion? So just jot down one of those 4 words. Second one, a type B child would be easily comforted by the stranger and could be distracted. Exploration, stranger, separation, or reunion. A type A child wouldn't notice that the PCG primary caregiver had re-entered and would appear apathetic, not bothered. At what stage would we see that? A type B child would show signs of distress. A type B child would show secure base behaviour. A type C child would push the primary caregiver away and show anger or frustration. At what stage would that happen? Okay, and of course, if you felt you needed a bit more time, hopefully you just paused, or pause now and go back and have a look and have a think about those. You've got the PowerPoint. So let's review the answers. Let's see how you did. So first one, that would be at the exploration stage, that child, if they're type C, they're insecure resistant. Remember the way I said to remember it's C for clingy. They're clingy, they don't want to leave their mother. So they're not going to be willing to investigate their new surroundings at the exploration stage. Next one, separation. That's the point when they might need comforting because they're upset because mum's left the room. But a type B child that's secure, remember, they can easily be comforted. There's new toys to look at. The stranger, as long as they've already been reassured by mum's reaction to the stranger that the stranger is safe, the child can be comforted. That's what most children will appear to be like. Next one was reunion, because we've got that idea of the primary caregiver re-entering. And a type A child just doesn't really bother. They almost didn't notice she left in the first place. Apathetic's a lovely word to use for that. Next one was separation. And I know that's probably one where you might have thought, oh, well, it could be separation, but it could be stranger. A type B child generally wouldn't show distress at the stranger. They might show a little bit of wariness, nervousness. In fact, you'd hope they would, you know, stranger danger. And they might be a little bit sort of reluctant and hiding behind mum slightly. But once they see mum smile and say, oh, hello, and, you know, show that they are safe, we wouldn't see distress at the stranger stage in a type B child. It would be at the separation. Okay. And next one was exploration again. Remember, secure-based behaviour, we only see it in a type B. And it's that idea of, off I go, I'm going to explore something, but I'm going to keep looking back at mum, showing mum, check she's still there, check it's safe. That shows that really secure, good, strong attachment. And then we have reunion again. That's when push you away. How dare you have left me in the first place, even though it was only for 2.5 or 3 minutes. How dare you? Okay, so by this point, we should be secure in what a type A, B and C child is like. And the details of Ainsworth's strange situation. So what she did, the setting it was in, and the idea of those different phases: exploration, stranger, separation, reunion. Okay, so we've got to be secure in that before we can think about evaluating. But this next bit is getting us to think a little bit more detailed about that study and exactly how she carried out that observation. And at this stage, it's appropriate to introduce to you a little bit of our research methods work. Now, research methods is really important, and actually it accounts for across, at the end of year 13, when you sit 3 big exam papers, it accounts for 1/3 of the marks, but there's only one section in your exam on it, but there's lots of little questions dotted here and there, which are about assessing your research method skills. Now, I don't introduce it to you until a bit later in year 12, and then we have one discrete research methods lesson every week. But sometimes we come across a study where it's more appropriate to kind of introduce you to bits side by side, and Ainsworth's strange situation is one of those. It was an observation, and when we're looking at observation, there's lots of things we can pull apart in order to help us evaluate. And that's why we're doing it here. But I thought it would be useful just to take it a little step back and say, what do we mean by research methods? And essentially, it's how psychologists find stuff out. It's the method or the tool that they use to find stuff out about psychology, about human behaviour. And they have a number of choices in terms of how they can do that, and they're all listed at the side there, and that's essentially the specification of what you have to learn. And we're just focusing in on that top one today because Ainsworth's strange situation was an observation. But over the course, we will be thinking about all of these different ways that psychologists find stuff out. And we'll be unpicking some of that language that you can see there, which should probably be unfamiliar to a lot of you. So I know there's a lot on there, and my intention was that you use this as part of your task, and you use this as a reference point, and if you have got a printer, brilliant, you print it out. But if not, you've got the PowerPoint electronically to use. Because I wanted to pack this full with some of our key language and then give you an opportunity to create some flashcards from that. So I'm going to talk you through the key bits, because some of that language on there needs explaining. and then I'm going to suggest that you pause and you take some time to create those flashcards. Okay, so Mary Ainsworth's strange situation was a controlled observation. I've used that word a few times now, which means as the researcher, she was trying to control as much as she possibly could. So she controlled the environment it was in. So it was what we might call a lab setting. It didn't look like a science laboratory, but it was controlled, and she could control the temperature and the lighting and the noise levels and who was there and what was there. So it was a controlled environment. And she was in control of things like when the stranger comes into the room and when when mum leaves and when mum comes back in, and it was those 3-minute intervals. So we call it a controlled observation, and that has some real advantages. And one of the big advantages when it's so highly controlled is it's very easy to do it again. To repeat it, we say it's replicable. It can be repeated. Somebody else, another researcher, can come along and use that exact same procedure and follow that exact same idea of, right, 3-minute intervals, this happens and then this happens, and this is the setup, and this is the size of the room, and all of that. And you might think, well, why does that matter? Well, the more times a study can be repeated, the more data we can get, the more reliable the conclusions can be. So that's why that is a strength. It is a real strength of this observation. But we can use a fancy term here. You can see I've bolded all of the important language. We can say it lacks ecological, that means real life, validity. And what I mean by that is I can't really apply these findings to a natural real life setting, because if I put you in a lab environment, strange environment, and observed your behaviour, you're likely to behave differently. Infants in the strange situation are the same, although they were very young and they were oblivious really to the fact they were being observed. At the end of the day, it wasn't their natural home environment where they felt comfortable. So we were always going to see some slightly different behaviour, and the same for the adults. So that's always going to be a criticism of something that's done in highly controlled false environments, lacks ecological validity. We can also say, I'm looking at the second row now, that this observation was overt. We can always use the language, was it overt or was it covert? Overt is when they know they're being watched. Covert is when it's undercover. That's how I always remember. Covert is cover, undercover. Overt is open. They know. Everybody knows they're part of this study and they're being observed. And that's great because it's ethical. You're not tricking anyone. You're not doing hidden cameras, you're not deceiving anybody, and we know that in psychology we have to try and keep within the ethical guidelines, so that's great. Full consent, everybody knows it. The infants, as I say, would have probably been a bit oblivious, but of course parents give consent on behalf of infants. But if I know I'm being observed, I'm going to put myself in the position, and I want you to as well. You're a parent of a young child and you've signed up, give full consent to be part of a study that you know is about attachment. Now immediately, that's quite socially sensitive. Attachment, my attachment with my child, that's about how good a parent I am. That's about how close a relationship I've got with my child. Immediately it's triggering that sort of thinking in a parent, especially a relatively new parent. And remember, these infants were only sort of 18 months old. So I've got this situation where I know I'm being watched and I know it's about attachment. I'm likely to alter my behaviour. We call it demand characteristics. I know the aims of the study, and so I'm going to change my behaviour. Not to mess it up. I'm not purposely trying to mess anything up. It's just a problem of social desirability. I want to come across as a loving, caring mother. I'm maybe going to be more attentive to the child and interact with them or kind of over-exaggerate things to them in a way I wouldn't if this was just being filmed somehow in my own home when I was acting naturally and normally. And that's often a problem. So when you do it overtly, yes, you tick the ethics box, But no, you then create this problem with demand characteristics. Okay, so we've got it's overt and it's controlled. There's another choice that psychologists make when they're doing an observation, and they have to decide whether they want to be involved in the sense of participant or non-participant. Of course, they're involved in the sense that they're the researcher, and they've designed this study, and they're obviously going to collect all of the results and analyse it. So of course they're involved in that sense. But if you're a participant in your own research, you actually play a part. So for example, if in Ainsworth's situation, Ainsworth herself acted as the stranger, that would have been participant, but she didn't. It was non-participant. She stood back, she observed, she wasn't part of it. And that is why we can identify that as a good thing, as a strength, because it allows her to be objective. She can't interfere in any way. She has to just sit back, observe, note what's been seen, look, observe the behaviour of the infants, but her behaviour and thoughts and bias and all the rest of it cannot influence. That's a good thing. And then the last one, and this is where it gets a bit technical. When you carry out an observation, you have a choice. Either you're going to watch for a particular period of time, in Ainsworth's case, watch for all of the episodes, the exploration, the separation, separation, reunion, and you record all of the behaviours that you see. And you would have a coding sheet, we call it a coding sheet, which is just literally a tally chart, basically, of all the behavioural categories that you've identified that you're interested in. So for Ainsworth, it would have been things like crying, pushing away, exploring, picking up toys, all of these behavioural categories. And you have it as a list, and you observe for the full time, and you tally off every behaviour that you see. And we call that event sampling, because what you're doing is you're recording every event of behaviour. And that's what Ainsworth did. The alternative to that is called time sampling, and that's when I just select particular time intervals and I write down everything within that time, but if something happens outside of that time, I ignore it. Now, that wouldn't have been appropriate for Ainsworth's study, and I'm not going to go into detail on that because I think that will just confuse matters, but for our purposes we're going to focus on this event sampling for now. Okay, and that's great because it ensures that all the behaviour is recorded and nothing is kind of being missed. But then on the flip side, if you're observing for a long period of time and there's lots going on, it's very intense to have to record every single incident of everything. That wasn't really a problem for Ainsworth because she only had one adult and one child to look at, and in a small contained space. So it wasn't really a problem. It would be more of a problem if I said to you, observe break time on the yard and use event sampling, and you've got to record every behaviour you see. Well, in normal times, there could be 100 children on the yard. So that would be near impossible. So that's why we sometimes see a different approach used. Okay, so lots of information there, I know. I suppose the beauty of this being recorded is you can watch bits back, pause me until you really get your head around it. The words in blue, though, are new vocabulary, and I'm just throwing lots of new vocabulary at you. And so I need to give you a chance to stop and to make sense of that. So we're going to have a flashcard pause. And this is probably going to take you 15 minutes or so, but remember these tasks span across Thursday and Friday's lesson. So I've listed there the ones I want you to create flashcards on, so a separate flashcard on each of those. If you're struggling with any of those, page 180 onwards in the textbook will help you, because that's the research methods chapter, focusing particularly on observation. Okay, so use that as a reference. But I've modelled one to you, and I know many of you, you're good with flashcards, but every now and again I still see a flashcard where I think, oh no, there's too much on that, or why is the question and the answer both on the same side? That doesn't help that process of testing, check, turn over. So this is how we should do our flashcards. So imagine the front of the card there. Now, first thing to note is, we've written research methods and highlighted that in a little colour, different colour or something to make it stand out. So when you're organising your flashcards at home, you can have them in sets and you can have your research methods ones together. And these will be the first of your research methods ones. So very simple, little title label in the corner. Question: what is the problem of demand characteristics? Nothing else written on that side. Turn over, back of card, when participants know they're part of a study and they therefore change their behaviour. Keep it succinct, because then you can easily keep testing yourself on it and checking, and someone can ask, mum or dad or somebody at home can ask you, and then they can check your answer. If it's really, really wordy, they can't do that easily and you can't use them effectively. Okay, so spend some time, pause me, spend some time creating your flashcards. So another evaluation point. So those were our sort of thinking about research methods and how we might use research methods to help us evaluate. And I'm going to be asking you to do that in a few minutes. But I wanted to show you this because this just brings home how socially sensitive it is, this research. Because we're identifying, we're labelling the children involved in this study as either A, B and C. And then from that, some of the conclusions that have been drawn, not just by Ainsworth, but other people, other researchers as well, is that if you're type B, then yes, that must mean you have a carer who is emotionally available for you, sensitive and supportive. But what if you signed up to Ainsworth's strange situation and she concluded that your child is type A, and from that therefore is suggesting that you are somehow rejecting, that you haven't been that warm supportive parent, you've been rejecting, and that's why they show the behaviour they do. Or your child gets identified as type C, as approximately 10 to 15% of children do, and therefore, oh, you must have been really inconsistent with your parenting. Sometimes you're happy to cuddle up to them, other times you're saying, no, I'm too busy. It must be your fault. Now, that's why we say this research is socially sensitive, because anything to do with your relationship with your children and anything to do with parenting is immediately socially sensitive. And those conclusions are quite sensitive. Okay, so that's another evaluation point we can use. We can use it to say it's almost unethical, actually, some of the conclusions that are being drawn. So we're going to build all that together. We're going to build our evaluation points by looking at the problems of those particular observation strategies: overt, controlled, event sampling. Plus we're going to build in the idea of social desirability, social sensitivity. Plus we're going to think about why this research has been useful, what it's shown us, and I'm going to come up with at least 3 bullet points, just in a table like this: 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, or we sometimes see it written as limitations. And in order to do that, we're going to go back to our page 84 and 85 in our textbook, where that right hand side of your page is got lots of good evaluative points on. Okay, but I want it in your words and I want you to have made sense of it, so it's the kind of language you could use if you were then incorporating this into an essay question. Okay, so that's one of those tasks I said needs to be achieved, and you keep that for your file. And then our essay question. So this is what our evaluative points are going to help us to achieve. It's going to help us to construct our 16-mark question. And that's what it is. And as I said before, it's on OneNote. So it's likely to be Friday before you're getting on to do this. We know we have 2 knowledge paragraphs, so that's where we're outlining what Ainsworth did, the procedure that she used, the findings that she came to, and then 3 evaluation paragraphs. Normally we'd use door frame There's elements of door frame that we can use, but really we'd be better off sticking with the evaluation points that you planned out probably yesterday. Remember our 3 strengths and our 3 weaknesses, and getting in all of that research methods language. And that's your 16 marker. So you're writing it up fully on OneNote, which is where I'll be marking it. So just to help with that, how did you get on with your evaluation points? So make sure you've done them before you look at the answers, and let's just see the sorts of things we can have as our evaluation. So on the strength side, high reliability, because it was highly controlled, so it can be repeated, and it has been repeated many times. It has allowed us to identify those different attachment types, and therefore there's been lots of additional studies, so it's all supporting evidence. And it was ethical in the sense that they knew they were being observed, they'd given full consent. However, and I've tried to kind of pair them up, match them up where there's a flip side, where it's high in reliability, it's low in validity usually. I always imagine it as like a seesaw, so where one side's high, the other side's low. So where it's high in reliability because it's highly controlled, it's then low in validity because it's not like real life. Okay. Problem of demand characteristics. So ethical because they knew they were being watched, overt, but then you have the problem of demand characteristics. You can't really win in psychology research. You're always going to have a problem somewhere. Could be considered unethical because think about those type C children, caused quite high levels of distress. So we could criticise it there. Socially sensitive. So distress levels to parents as well when they think about the conclusions. And the other thing, and this was in your textbook reading, but important to think about, it's culturally relative. And what that means is Ainsworth was American. This was very much an American study, which was based on Western ideas of parenting and childhood and what a child should behave like. When you try and apply that to other cultures, it's maybe not fair to draw those same conclusions, because every culture has a very different understanding of childhood and relationships and family structures and what it means to parent. Some cultures encourage the children to be very independent from a young age. Other cultures, the child will barely leave their mother's chest. And actually, if you try and apply this study, you'll find different conclusions, but maybe not because the children are insecure, maybe just because of cultural norms. And that's something we're going to be looking at further when we look at cross-cultural variations. Okay, so that should be plenty of evaluation points, plus any others that you came up with to get you going and to set you up for that essay. Okay, if timing is an issue for you, I'd like you to challenge yourself and do the essay in timed conditions. I know we're typing, it's not quite the same, but the more practice you can get in timed conditions, the better. I'm not insisting you do it in timed conditions. I'm going to give you that little bit of flexibility, but I always say to students who say, oh, I ran out of time, I always advise, so therefore, for you, every opportunity you get, you complete it in timed conditions so that you can get faster and faster and faster every time and more succinct. Okay, it's not a race, but we need to get succinct, don't we, in our responses. Right, so that's it. So this is, I'm just looking at the time, 33 minutes of a video, plus all of the pausing to complete the tasks, plus then the essay. That's your 2 hours, plus a little bit of homework time. And that's what we want to have achieved by the end of the week. Okay, I'll be around on Teams, so give me a shout if there's questions or concerns. Thanks, guys. Have a nice weekend. Enjoy the snow. I believe it's meant to snow a lot this weekend. Okay, take care.